perhaps given, we'll have time to, people can we just want to be relatively informal, so folks can potentially raise some questions in the chat, but please allow the speakers to complete their presentations, and we can either take some questions, some burning questions immediately after each, and then a broader discussion at the conclusion of all three presentations. All right, so that's our plan today. And I'd like to begin by inviting Brendan Kelly to speak to us about some search activities. And the title of his presentation is Transparency and Accessibility of Arctic Research. And I don't know, Anne, are you running slides, or will Brendan do his own slides, if there are slides? Right?
Yeah, I'll run them, so I'll share my screen in a moment. And just with regards to the questions, if there are questions coming in the chat you want me to address, maybe Anne, you or somebody can forward them. I'm not adept at reading the chat and talking and moving my mouse around at the same time. Just a limitation of my age group, I'm afraid. Yeah.
So yeah, let's have Anne and me sort of monitor that chat.
Okay,
interrupt as necessary. Thank you, Brendan.
Yep. So let me share my screen here. Let me know if you see my screen.
We do, yes.
Great, okay, thanks. So Roberta, you mentioned the IARPC research planning workshop that was held recently, and I'll start there and say that it was notable that there was considerable discussion of transparency and accessibility of Arctic research in that workshop. As there should have been, I believe, and as there was when I led development of the plan in 2011 and 2012. For the past 5 years, I have directed the study of environmental Arctic change, or search, and there too, the issues of transparency and accessibility have been front and center, as they should be. And I guess I would just observe that collectively, IARPC, Search, ArcticNet in Canada, and others are making progress on this front, but we certainly have far to go. It has, in fact, been enlightening and an honor to work with the cadre of smart scientists and Indigenous leaders in Search and ArcticNet. I should say I serve on the board of ArcticNet. And this cadre thinks not only of their individual disciplinary expertise, but also broader issues like transparency, accessibility, diversity, and inclusion. So just as one example, this morning I participated in a discussion with a Harvard graduate class studying the employment of scientific Indigenous knowledge in decision-making. Another example, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, Search will host via Zoom webinar and Facebook Live a release party for 3 short videos that we produced in collaboration with the Bering Sea Elders Group and Eli Kinich, a journalist and filmmaker. After the Ice explores the consequences of diminishing sea ice from the perspectives and in the voices of the people of the Bering Sea. It was previewed at the American Geophysical Union meeting in San Francisco last winter, and more recently at NSF. If you cannot make the virtual release party tomorrow, the films will be available on the Search website and eventually through public television. The After the Ice videos were one effort to be more inclusive. As was the Arctic Futures 2050 conference that Search hosted in September of 2019. That conference brought together 400 scientists, Indigenous knowledge holders, and decision makers to advance co-production of knowledge about the Arctic. The Search website has the videos from all the presentations and panels at that conference. Let me turn back, though, to this question of transparency and accessibility. Among the great minds in search have been two former NASA scientists, both of whom have led search's work on land ice. Walid Abdulati was the chief scientist at NASA, and he is fond of saying that the science is not done until it's published. Well, Bob Binshadler, also a former NASA scientist, previously led the search land ice work, and he elaborates on Walid's maxim, relating it as the science is not done until it's published and available to decision makers. And really, this is transparency and accessibility in, I think, really brief form. And I would argue that science by its very nature is transparent. You don't get very far in science if you don't make your results available to others for scrutiny and argument and impassioned debate and peer review. But I would argue we are not very accessible in science because much of that science is, as we all know, highly context specific, relies heavily on narrow vocabularies and jargon, and hence is hard for people outside of the disciplines to access. Well, nonetheless, when Walid and Bob sort of had this discussion and gave us this elaborated maxim, we felt pretty smart, and we adopted the idea and thought it would be fairly easy to translate science into terms useful for decision makers. And in fact, we've had some success in forming local, state, and federal policymakers with our Arctic Answers briefs. So these are answers to specific questions about change in the Arctic, written by experts, but in a format that is accessible to policymakers. And those are now being published in the journal Arctic, Antarctic, and Alpine Research. They're also on the search website. And what we found working with congressional offices in particular was what they helped us in the development of the structure of these briefs. They needed the answer to be clear and in 2 pages or less. But they also wanted to know that this was well backed up science. It wasn't just somebody's opinion. So the way we've done this is to, on the website, in addition to the brief itself, the 2-page brief that sort of forms the apex of this pyramid, there are what would otherwise be the literature cited section, but organized into tiers of increasing detail. So the first tier below the brief itself are broadly accessible summaries like you might see in Scientific American. A tier below that has more technical syntheses. And then finally below that is the original peer-reviewed, specific articles we call building blocks. As I said, this has been helpful, and in the process of developing the Arctic Answers and convening the Arctic Futures 2050 conference, it became clear that there is a need to develop deeper relationships with decision makers, as well as with Indigenous people, to advance co-production. So let me just show you what our current model is. So this is a model we've developed in collaboration with the Eskimo Walrus Commission and the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. And basically, we'll start with the goal there in the center. The overall goal is to produce and share actionable knowledge to inform decisions about the socio-ecological systems in the Arctic and beyond. And with the expected outcomes, the desired outcomes are to enhance common purpose among diverse providers and users of knowledge, enhance the ability of producers, funders, and users of new knowledge to evaluate research needs in a holistic context, to identify systems of interactions most in need of further study, and to advance processes for realizing the benefits of contributions from different knowledge systems. In many ways, those outcomes aren't particularly different than you might see in a lot of science proposals over the years. But the key difference is that this is done not just by scientists, but this is all conceived collaboratively with audiences for the information, as well as Indigenous knowledge holders. And it's essentially broken down into 4 objectives that happen iteratively. So we start by harnessing the collaboration abilities across decision makers, Indigenous people, scientists. We develop a shared framework to talk about research needs. And then we conduct that research jointly to inform decision-making, again, in this shared holistic way. Assess what we've done, update it, and essentially we see this as a sort of cycle that needs to happen. So that's kind of, in a very short amount of time, a glimpse of the evolution in our thinking and search and where we're headed. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Brendan. I'd like to give the audience members a few minutes if they have any burning questions for clarification. If not, then we can move on to the next speaker. Give folks a few moments to collect thoughts for initial impressions, perhaps.
Hey, Brandon, this is Kelly Ulig from NOAA's Arctic Research Program.
Hi, Kelly.
I just wanted to say thank you belatedly for your support for the Bering Sea Elders group to get together and have that workshop last year in Nome, and subsequently for providing support for the Arctic Report Card, Voices from the Bering Sea essay. I had a question for you. Following Arctic Futures 2050, what has been kind of the momentum building from that effort? I attended last year and it was really excellently done. But I haven't seen a lot of follow-up. Obviously, COVID has kind of thrown the world into chaos, but just curious on your thoughts on what the next step is.
Yeah, so sitting on my desk at Middlebury's Institute here, a desk to which I've had little access for the last 6 months, is an envelope with your name on it and a hard copy of the report. We did get the report out last spring electronically on the search website. And we have a limited number of hard copies I'm happy to send to everybody. I did ask Renee, for her advice on who to send it to, and NOAA, and she listed you and Candace and a whole bunch of other people. So look for that. But more importantly, I think maybe what you're asking is, intellectually, what's the aftermath? And I think it's been really helpful. Obviously, a lot of people appreciated that we had such a large Indigenous contingent. And that was due to a lot of hard work by the Search Steering Committee, and particularly by Rochelle Daniel on that committee, who sort of convened for us an Indigenous people's participation working group. And this was Rochelle and Julie Raymond Jacobian and Dakush, Carlo, and Corey Erickson, and Rosemary Athan-Nourick, and I'm going to forget several people here. But they really advised us and helped us in the recruitment of so many Indigenous people. One effect is that, Melinda Chase is another, is they tell me, those people on that working group, that we stood up for the purpose of the conference, that they continue to meet, and they found it really useful, that has brought them together and to continue. So that's, I think, a good legacy. I think it made very clear, as I sort of alluded to, that it's a good thing that we brought everybody together. We had good discussions, but it's really clear there's a lot more difficult discussion ahead. I think this is a particularly I've been at this for over 40 years. The background of my screen here, shot here, is a skin boat that I whaled out of many years ago in St. Lawrence Island. So I've been at this a long time, and I've worked with lots of Indigenous knowledge holders. I've learned a great deal from them over that period of time. And there's always been, you know, some kind of tensions with science and certainly with policymakers, but it's particularly acute right now. And my prediction is it's gonna be that way for a while. And I remember that the first morning of the conference, at the first break, Fran Ulmer walked up to me and said, "Well, Brendan, this is great. It's terrific you're doing all this." But she said, "But really, people aren't really getting to the hard stuff." And I said to her, "Well, Fran, this is the first morning, you know, let's see how it evolves." I think at the end, it was true. People, I think Jackie Schaefer put it best to me. She said, "Well, you know, people just have to quit walking around like they're in thin ice and being afraid to say the wrong thing." But a lot of people are. They're really afraid to say the wrong thing. So there's a lot of work for us to do. And I think all of us in this conversation need to remember to take a deep breath and, you know, understand that the stakes are very high for everybody. And so it's going to be some difficult conversation. That said, all kinds of people are reporting what, you know, Rochelle and Melinda reported, that they're now in different conversations. And I think that's an important legacy. It certainly brought us together with what we hope will be the co-PIs for the Indigenous community for our next round of search.
Thank you very much, Brendan, for your response. And thank you, Kelly, for your question. Before moving on to our next speaker, I just want to point out Paul Berkman noted in the chat with relevance to Brendan's presentation about holistic approaches with informed decision-making, that there is a science diplomacy and engine of informed decision-making operating through our global pandemic with humanity. Looks like an article, there's a journal link, and Anne has noted that she'll include the link in our meeting notes. So you can look out for that.
Thanks, Paul, appreciate that.
All right, so I'd next like to invite Helen Wiggins from ARCUS to give us an update on ARCUS activities, and her title is Knowledge Sharing for Stakeholder and Decision Maker Needs. Helen, do you have any slides to present, and will you be sharing your screen yourself?
And how's that working?
There we go, you're on.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you, Roberto. And thanks for the invitation to have a chance to talk with everybody today. Again, I'm Helen Wiggins, the Executive Director of the Arctic Research Consortium of the US, or ARCUS. I'm based in or outside of Wasilla, Alaska, in a fixer-upper log cabin. You can see behind me some high maintenance dogs and a bunch of very spoiled chickens. And so today I'll be talking a little bit about ARCUS activities that are relevant to environmental intelligence, and a little bit about ARCUS for those of you who don't know who we are, some examples of what we're doing, the approaches that we use for that work, and how you can use ARCUS resources in your own work. So just a few little basics about ARCUS. We're a nonprofit organization headquartered in Fairbanks, Alaska, but with staff spread across the nation. We have 13 staff, some of those part-time, and a governing board of directors. And I think actually Joe Hardesty, one of our board members, I saw Joe log on today. Hi, Joe. And our vision really is sort of the core of who we are. And it's about connecting the different groups who are engaged in Arctic research and bridging across the disciplines, perspectives, geography, and knowledge systems. You know, and we're not doing sort of research priorities ourselves, but it's about that bridging function and that connecting function. And we recently updated our strategic goals and objectives. And I've listed the 3 main goals here. And we have specific objectives that sort of go under each of these goals, but this should give you a general sense of our focus. And, you know, again, it's not about specific research priorities of our own, but it's about kind of building and sustaining collaborations for Arctic research and education. And sort of another core aspect of who we are is our values. And these values, which we take very seriously, really enable us to do the kind of collaborative work that we strive to do. A few of these, Brendan, you also mentioned in your talk. We didn't plan that. And I think also is very relevant for the work that the IARPA collaboration teams are doing as well. And then again, we were invited to talk about sort of ARCUS activities and how they might be relevant to environmental intelligence. And we are listed as a performance element, which I posted up here. And just to note, when we're talking about Arctic science in the ARCUS context, we define Arctic science very broadly. So it's including multiple disciplines, multiple perspectives, and specifically including traditional and indigenous knowledge. And really our role in sort of the realm of environmental intelligence is that communications and exchange of knowledge function. And then here's just a few slides with some highlights of some of our activities that I think could contribute to environmental intelligence. This is not comprehensive at all. This first one is the Sea Ice Prediction Network, which is a collaborative project and really is a network of people and groups that are working together to improve seasonal and subseasonal Arctic sea ice forecasting. Sort of the flagship activity is the Sea Ice Outlook, which is an open call for people to contribute predictions. And about 40 groups typically participate in this through the summer months. And the SIPN team reviews and analyzes and synthesizes all the predictions and puts out monthly reports. And, you know, and thinking about the user standpoint, this really evolved from originally, the first year was in 2008, and it was solely focused on sea ice extent. And then in talking with different users, industry, other stakeholders, really realizing that sea ice extent is interesting, but not often useful for operations. So expanding those variables to things like ice-free date, sea ice probability, and ice advance. The Sea Ice for Walrus Outlook is a partnership between ARCUS, the Eskimo Walrus Commission, paid local indigenous observers, National Weather Service, and University of Alaska Fairbanks, where we provide weekly reports on weather and sea ice conditions in the Bering and Chukchi coastal regions from multiple information sources, including National Weather Service forecasts and models, satellite imagery, and the local observations. The Indigenous Scholars Program is a program we started a couple years ago where we support Indigenous scholars, which we define as just experts in their own knowledge system, to go to DC to talk with policymakers and decision makers about issues that they and their communities care about. Sort of another set of activities are meetings and events. These are just a few recent ones that we were involved in. The Polar Technology Conference we did with NSF this past March as a hybrid in-person and virtual meeting because it was in March. And so that was an exciting time to try to figure out who's going to show up and who's not going to travel. And that was really about sharing ideas and knowledge on technology that can advance polar research. We've got a very short, brief, easy to read meeting report out right now. And there was also an IARPIC self-forming collaborations team stood up on this topic as well. We recently did, again with NSF in April, a virtual meeting that gathered the NSF-funded Navigating the New Arctic, or NNA projects, for them to just come together and share challenges and opportunities in doing convergence research and how the projects can connect and work with each other. And a plug for our upcoming ARCUS annual meeting, which is happening later this month, which is an opportunity to talk about several basically collaboration themes, anything from how to build interdisciplinary teams to Arctic STEM education to dealing with COVID challenges in Arctic research. And that's, again, an open virtual meeting, so I hope everybody could attend that. We've got a few other examples listed there at the bottom. We have a set of communication tools that anyone on this team or this team as a whole can use. Several mailing lists. Arctic Info is sort of our main broadcast list where you can share news, events, funding opportunities, resources. These statistics listed here on this slide are just from this past calendar year. A virtual online Witness the Arctic newsletter, and we're always looking for contributions for that. So just let me know if you've got something you'd like to write about for our newsletter. a webinar series, a web page that lists existing recommendations for how to work with Northern and Indigenous communities, several other online resources. And one other activity I wanted to highlight was working with Arabic Secretariat staff to basically add capacity to collaboration team activities. So we do have some ARCUS staff time funded by NSF to help collaboration teams with, your outreach and communications, increasing or diversifying participation in meetings or other activities, helping you reach out to individuals or other groups, and also providing some additional staff support and times to help you implement or move forward ideas that might emerge from collaboration team discussions. Maybe there's a great idea about a product or a event or a workshop or a proposal, and it's a great idea, but you just don't have, with all the volunteers involved, the teams don't have the capacity to do that. So we do have some ARCUS staff time to help teams with those kinds of activities. And then so those were really describing like what we do. This slide talks a little bit about how we do the work that we do. And these are just sort of 5 components I wanted to highlight of our approach with our projects, and that we've sort of learned in the many years of doing this, and which again probably are applicable to the work that most collaboration teams are doing. And one is the clear and transparent process for sharing information and decisions. And process is just so important. And by this, we really mean, it's clear to everyone how information was gathered, who did it, what's going to be done with the information and why, who is making the decisions, even if people don't agree with the decisions. And it's clear how people can enter into that discussion, that there's clear strategic priorities, which is all about focus, focus, focus. There's the old saying, if everything is a priority, nothing is. Same thing with user groups. If every group is a priority, then no one is. And I think this is a really common challenge that we all struggle with in Arctic research because it's just so broad by its nature. And then user-centered, that's a bit self-explanatory, but starting with the end in mind, identifying the key users and stakeholders when there's lots of different groups, sort of understanding the different needs and prioritizing, knowing how the users will interact with the information and involving them from the beginning. Collaboration skills, that's really needed in this kind of work. It's often sort of termed as soft skills, but it's really much more than that because there's whole fields of research about how to do collaboration well. And I think what we're talking about here is, skills like emotional intelligence, open communication, understanding group dynamics, fostering a sense of belonging and sort of avoiding any gatekeeping that might make people feel like they don't belong in a conversation. And then defining metrics of success, which again, I think is inherently difficult in large, collaborative, broad work. But I think it's really critical to at least have that discussion because that discussion itself has value. And we often ask ourselves, okay, so what's the change we want to see? If this is successful, what will this landscape look like? And of course, when you have metrics of success, you have to be willing to fail, and that's can be difficult, but it's really important. And with the metrics, really focusing again on sort of the users and the stakeholders of the information. And just my last slide, just as a reminder, or for folks who don't know that, we are a resource for connecting. We can help this team or anyone on this group as individuals in your own work with sort of announcements and outreach and networking and additional support for your collaboration team activities. And I think that's it.
Great. Thank you very much, Helen.
Yeah.
As before, I'd like to give maybe a few moments for the audience to ask any burning questions or initial impressions. Give folks a few moments to think about that.
And Robert, I'll throw just the ARCUS website too in the chat, because more
great.
information on all the products and resources and activities is available there too.
Thank you, Helen.
Yeah.
All right, I don't see any virtual hands being raised at the moment or anybody else coming off mute. So So we can hold some general questions and discussions until after our third presentation. That looks good. All right, so I'd next like to welcome Jill Prewitt to give us an update on the Bering Region Ocean Data Sharing Initiative, or BODSI. Jill, do you have some slides to share with us, or?
Yeah, let me start sharing. And while that's being pulled up, thank you very much for inviting me to present here today. And let's see, did that start sharing?
Yes, we just need you to shift to the presenter mode, or the slideshow mode, yeah.
Okay, I think
there you go. Great.
So yeah, thank you again for inviting me to present, and my apologies to anybody who's already seen this at the data collaboration team, but hopefully you'll get something out of it the second time around as well. So most of you are probably familiar with AOOS as a system already, but just a little reminder, we're part of the National Integrated Ocean Observing System. We're non-federal, non-regulatory, and policy neutral. And we don't do directed research, but we do get involved with researchers to collect the observations that are needed for decision making. So our mission is to increase the observing and forecasting capacity in Alaska. And we're stakeholder driven and science-based. So there are three main questions that we're asking when we're getting started with a project, or overall. Do we have the observations that are needed? What do people need to make the decisions that they need to make in the coastal and ocean realm in Alaska? And how can we provide the information and the observations that are needed for those decisions? So these graphics just show the basic stakeholder process, talking to the stakeholders and hearing their concerns, learning about what information and products that are needed, going out and either supporting the collection of observations or finding out if somebody is already collecting those observations, and then providing data management, integration, and analysis of those observations, and hopefully meeting those stakeholder needs, those goals that were identified from the beginning. So the bottom circle graphic just illustrates all the various stakeholders and communities and people that are our stakeholders and drive what we're doing. And our four major themes are in the center there, with marine operations, coastal hazards and inundation, water quality, and ecosystems, fisheries, and climate trends. So again, this is a really busy slide, but somewhat intentional to show the breadth of things that AOOS is involved in. And so we're supporting the observing functions to meet those societal needs. So for maritime operations, examples include weather stations, wave buoys, mapping, surface currents, all to support safe maritime operations in Alaska. For coastal hazards, we're focused a lot on installing water level gauges, mapping of coastal bathymetry, so that communities can plan and be resilient for storm surge or events like that. Ecosystem, fisheries, and climate, we help support ecosystem moorings, observations of fish, bird, and marine mammals, and sea ice, so that decision makers have the information they need, such as the Fisheries Management Council, ADF&G, or NOAA. For water quality, we're focused a lot on ocean acidification, supporting observations and monitoring through Aleutic Pride, Shellfish Hatchery, Seator, sensors on the coastal ferry, and community sampling, and also supporting the ocean acidification network. And similarly for harmful algal blooms, supporting sampling and the harmful algal bloom network. And then putting all of that together into data and information projects so that those observations can be used to their fullest extent, make sure that the people who need the information, the decision makers, can access it, can find the data when they need it, and then have it visualized or make tools that are making the information easier to use or easier to understand. So now on to my project, the Bering Region Ocean Data Sharing Initiative. This is a national initiative funded by the White House, and our region in Alaska, due to the rapid ecosystem changes that have been seen in the Bering Sea area, the AOOS board decided to focus this effort on this area for at least the next 2 years. And you can see on the map that we have a very broad definition of Bering region, all the way from the Aleutians up through the southern Chukchi. So we're interested in data and information throughout this area. So major goals of this project are to increase the regional data sharing among the federal, state, community, and private sector partners. And this is to facilitate the stakeholder response to the rapid ecosystem change that's being seen in the Bering Sea, and to help support the agency management and the community decision-making in the area, and also to enhance economic opportunities in the area as well. So just some example of the activities that we've gotten going so far. I just started with AOOS in April, but we're getting things off the ground now, hopefully. We've set up the initial Bering Sea data integration portal that contains the relevant information that was in the AOOS system already, all the Bering Sea information. And just a little example, you can explore this data portal through 2 initial methods. The exploring the map, you can click on that and pull up data that you can visualize together. I have one example there where I've pulled up the sea ice concentration and then also the real-time sensors with weather observations, wind, waves, temperature, those type of things. And then you can also explore the data sets through the catalog, searching through the catalog. So just a closer look at exploring the interactive map. As you can see, I have pulled up the sea ice concentration there, and you can look closer at how that's moving. You can also look back in time, what the sea ice did over a number of years, or on a given day. So the portal, there's lots of information, lots of data sets in here. If you're ever having trouble or just getting started with the portal, you can click on this help button. It brings up an interactive tutorial. There's also a feedback button. So if something doesn't seem to be working quite right, you can talk or communicate with our data management team. If you click that button, submit your feedback, they'll get back to you very quickly. And you can also explore the data sets right from within the map to bring up data, find data that you're looking for, and visualize it alongside the other data. So an example of the type of tools that we're planning on creating through this project is an emergency response tool in the Bering Strait area. And if you're familiar with the AOOS Cook Inlet Response Tool or the IRMA Emergency Response Management Application, this will be similar to that type of tool, kind of an IRMA light. We're working with WWF, Arctic, and Russia programs, and if anybody else is interested in this project and wants more information about how you could be involved, definitely let me know. So this tool will include hopefully all the data and information that's needed by emergency responders to be able to respond to that emergency. And the good thing about this tool is that we're hoping for it to have transboundary information. We hear a lot from the Alaska side that we don't know much about what's going on in the Russian side. So that's why we're working with the WWF partners to try to pull in some of that information that maybe only be available in Russian and get that into the system in English so that all responders can access it. So this will include information such as spatial data layers, such as species distribution, where infrastructure might be located to assist in a response, and where communities are located. It'll include the real-time observations of wind, weather, waves to aid in that response, models of nowcasts and forecasts, and we have the shore zone video and imagery as well. So a little bit of a closer look at that. An example, if there was an incident in a certain area, the emergency responders could click on that area, pull up information such as where's the nearest Pacific walrus haulouts, where are the nearest seabird colonies, where are important spawning grounds for fish, for example. They could also pull up the shore zone imagery, as I mentioned. If they're not familiar with the area, look at the coastline, see what type of coastline they're looking at. Is it sandy? Is it rocky? Is it steep cliffs? How will that affect the response? And also the real-time sensors, the wind speed and direction. If it was an oil spill, for example, where is that oil likely to be taken by the wind or the currents, and how will that affect their response? So that was one example of a type of tool that we're working on right now. We're also planning on a tool for vessel traffic to be able to visualize how that is changing or happening in the area. And with all the other data sets that we have, you can also pull up other information and overlay that with the vessel traffic. Like I have the cetacean biologically important areas here pulled up alongside with vessel density so that decision makers, planners would be able to look and see where does that vessel traffic overlap with important marine mammal sites or locations. And we're also working with the Harmful Algal Bloom Network and the Ocean Acidification Network to be able to visualize some of that data as well and get that information out to the communities. And we really want to hear ideas, what other tools could we make for you if you have an idea of something that would be really helpful for communities or other decision makers to be able to use the data in a more useful manner. Then definitely keep us posted, let us know. We want to be able to make what's important for you. So lots of other various activities with the project. We're really interested in getting new data into the portal. Some of the data that is not easily accessible, for example, Alaska Department of Fish and Game might not have all of their data easily accessible. And then other data that is out there in the public, NOAA, Fish and Wildlife, USGS, it might be out there, but it's all in various places. And if you want to be able to visualize that data together, then it could be good to have all of that data in the portal. So you can look at NOAA, Department of Commerce, and USGS DOI data side by side, rather than having to go to many different websites. And I mentioned also trying to get some of the Russian information and also local observations into the portal. So we've also been working with the Environmental Intelligence Collaboration Team to facilitate the getting out the research cruise status spreadsheet, although I'd shout out to Anne Christine, she's done the lion's share of the work on that one. So thank you very much for that. We're also working on developing outreach materials such as the Bering Science Report. And this is kind of a summary of what's known right now, what do we expect to happen in the near future, and those potential impacts to the biological resources and people. And so we put out the first report in June, summarizing kind of what happened over the spring, winter, and fall. And in the next day or two, we'll have the next report out summarizing what has happened over the summer, what we know about what's happened over the summer. And of course, a big thing that we really wanted to do in this first year was to get out to the communities and share results that were coming in, but also hear their concerns and observations, gather in feedback on our projects, and get input on what we should work on, what are the priorities. But of course, COVID has thrown a giant monkey wrench into that as we're not able to get out to the communities. So we're doing our best over Zoom, phone calls, webinars, and other ways to try to keep those lines of communication open and hear what the priorities are. But it's definitely been a challenge. So with that being said, since we aren't out there as much as we want to be, we definitely want to get the word out that please contact us if you want any more information, if you have any ideas, or if you have data that you know of that should go into the portal, then let us know. And you can check out our webpage and Facebook for updates. And I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Jill. Very, very informative. I'll note that Anne has placed a couple of links in the chat. I was trying to identify the appropriate link for the data portal. I don't know if Jill, if you can verify that those are the correct ones, or if not, please include the appropriate ones. I was trying to look online as well, and my view was a little bit different from what you were sharing on your slides, so I wasn't precisely clear if that was the right one.
Yeah, I'll put a link.
Thank you. It looks like Kelly, raise your hand if you have an initial question for Jill. Yeah.
Sure. Hey, Jill. Thanks so much for this overview of BODSI. I missed the data meeting, so I'm really glad to kind of catch this. Let's be in touch about what NOAA data you need and see if I can help you guys get access where appropriate. So I'll follow up with you offline. Just wanted to make that connection right now before I forgot.
Definitely. Thank you.
And Jill, if you can maybe stop sharing your screen so we can get, yeah.
There we go.
Everybody back, or as many people as possible. I see Katya has raised her hand. Katya, if you can come off mute and make a comment or ask a question.
Yeah, thanks, Roberta. Thanks, Jill. I'm Katya Kontor. I'm a AAA Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the National Science Foundation Office of Polar Programs. I have a quick question, and I'm sorry if you mentioned it. I was in and out of the meeting, but your tool for the emergency managers, how do you make it known? How do you make it available for the emergency managers, and how do you communicate about that? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's always a good thing for us to keep in mind when we develop these tools, is making sure that it's known that they are available. So one thing, all of the AOOS tools and data are publicly available. So anybody can go on, once the tool is live, anybody will be able to go on and utilize the tool. So I think the key will be to get the word out as broadly as possible with our partners and in a way marketing it so that everybody knows that it's there.
Thank you.
All right, I'm trying to track the chat and view the screen. Helen, did you want to?
Sorry, I was just looking for my hand raised. Yeah, and just because I have to run in just a minute.
Oh, sure.
That was great, and just another plug to connect with you right now. I'll connect with you offline as well, but it would be great to connect with the Bering Sea communities that we work with the Sea Ice for Walrus Outlook project, and make sure sort of we're advocating for use of the portal and having them use it, because I don't think we have sort of that listed as part of our weekly reports, and I think it's such a rich information source, and we absolutely should. So we'll shoot you an email, Jill.
Yeah, great. And Molly and I have been chatting that we'd like to maybe use you as a resource to get some of our word out about the Bering Science Report and other things.
Absolutely.
Great.
Helen, since you said you had to leave in a few minutes, oh, Molly, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question because I have to leave in a few minutes too. But my question is, and this is always something that's gotten to me, we have these great programs that do a lot of facilitation, connection, partnership, but then there are also the research collaboration networks. A lot of the NNA projects now have some kind of collaboration facilitation. And so I'm always thinking, how do the collaborators collaborate? And is there a need for something, you know, to bring all these, to do something a little bit more integrative among all these collaborating entities? And I'm just going to throw that up to anyone who wants to answer that.
Yeah, Brendan or Helen or Jill? Brendan, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question, Molly, and one that comes up frequently in all strata. I think there's no magic bullet, except it does seem to me that, you know, if people who are directing such efforts, you, Helen, me, others on the call, I think we have to develop, to stretch ourselves, to develop the ability to really precisely explain what the other entities do. So, because basically, you think about it, how many times have you been asked by, you know, Fran Omer or somebody at OSTP or a congressional office or something, well, what is ARCUS? What is SEARCH? What is AOOS? How does this all fit together? And what I feel like is it's very easy to explain what your organization does. But I think the real service would be if we could all explain concisely and in a way that usefully shows what the value is each other's. So that I think it's a burden we need to take on to be able to do that. Because otherwise it's just, I remember when Fran became the chair of the Arctic Research Commission, and you know, she came to me and she said, well, this is just such a alphabet soup. How do I make sense of all this? And you know, she said, John Farrell and I often, you know, like try to map it all out. And you can do those kind of mappings. They get really, you know, like a wiring diagram for a Ford pretty fast. But I think, you know, the gist of it is if we can explain really precisely what the value added of each organization and do it in a constructive way, then we're sort of adding to the problem instead of lessening it. I don't know any other magic bullet.
Thank you, Brendan.
Yeah, and I do think there is room for people who do this kind of work, both to sort of share with each other, like, you know, good practices, what's worked, sort of what we're working on, do a little bit of very high level coordination. And you know, it would be great to have like a virtual coffee chat, even if it's like twice a year of, you know, what's going on, what challenges are you facing, how are you dealing with it? Hey, have you thought about linking with this group, or there's resources over here? So I think, you know, it couldn't be a lot of burden, but I do think there's room for some more of that. And again, just sort of an informal coffee chat style. It's basically a community of practice who does this kind of work, right? Oh, and Kelly, you had a really good suggestion on chat too.
Kelly, do you want to share?
Yeah, so I was thinking as a new project coordinator for another one of these sorts of groups for the research networking activity, I would love to get plugged in with what you guys in the more established community have been up to, and to kind of receive more regular updates and exactly have that opportunity to have kind of a coffee chat and talk about best practices, and maybe we could think about forming some sort of self-forming team. It maybe doesn't have to go through IARPIC, but that's would be maybe the best portal to get the word out about it. And then just meet quarterly or twice a year or something like that, something that's not too much of a burden on all of us who are Zoom fatigued already. And yeah, we could try, see what comes of it.
I think it's a good idea, and doing it through ARPIC collaborations makes a lot of sense. And I would propose that the target audience, you know, might be think of all of your agencies and the turnover, you know, think of who will be your principal next year and the year after that. And as people come to these offices, they're always smart, energetic people. but we're talking Arctic alphabet soup. So making it easy for them coming in to start to figure out this landscape might work really well through something like Helen and Kelly are suggesting.
Yeah, I think it would be a great idea too. I mean, best practices and also lessons learned, how to go forward with certain things, like whatever you do, do not do this. This did not work out. Something like making sure that we learn from each other's mistakes and each other's successes.
Thank you, Jill. We did schedule actually a time through the half hour for additional discussion. If folks have any pending questions or other thoughts they'd like to share, including new suggestions for moving forward. I see Brendan.
Yeah, Jill, could you just, you mentioned Irma in your talk, but can you just briefly tell me how AOOS and Irma intersect? So there's an oil spill in the Chukchi Sea. Responders want to overlay it with various data sets. Where are they going to go? How does that work?
So I'm just learning the whole AU system and our capabilities as well. But as far as I understand, and I can get more information for you if this doesn't fully answer it, but the Irma, we're working with the Irma team to provide the data management for them, but a lot of the data is still housed on the federal servers. So AOOS just kind of pulls it in, and then once an incident happens, makes that data readily available. If it's not already publicly available, then the data management system can instantly make that available to the Irma folks. So one of the big problems, and one of the reasons why we're putting together this Bering Strait tool, is that the Russian emergency responders do not have access to that Irma data readily. So if there's an incident on their side of the Bering Strait, they can't access that data, and there's lots of politics obviously behind allowing the Russians to access data that is living on a US federal server. So what we're trying to do with this is make as much data publicly available so that they can access it whenever they need it. So most of the data that will be available to them is already publicly available, but just on various sources that they would have to go in many different places to look for it. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
Great, thank you, Jill and Brendan, for your question. I see folks are beginning to leave us for other responsibilities. I'll just read a comment from Betsy Baker, who just left us. Thank you for the informative session. In respect to Molly's question, this webinar was an excellent start and provided clear, engaging information about distinctions between the three groups presented and how they complement one another. You could support each other by focusing on and checking each other, your respective group's strengths, audiences, and mandates. So it seems to resonate with Kelly's idea about having this sort of larger, I'll call it a meta group, if you will, larger coordination group that is really keen on ensuring that there is consistent, clear communication among different entities. So let's see, again, we have a little bit of time if folks still have any pending questions or final thoughts. If not, maybe any quick updates from different individuals with respect to different activities or upcoming events that they might be aware of and relevant to this group.
Maybe, Roberto, I could just add another point.
Sure.
Going back to this question that Molly had, the other thing that we've found, so I mentioned, I think that I sit on the board of ArcticNet, which is in some ways a Canadian parallel to Search. It's not completely parallel, but that was an attempt by ArcticNet and Search specifically to address this issue of how do we coordinate our efforts, because we work in very similar space. And what we found was helpful was to put me on their board and their director on our steering committee. You know, it adds to everybody's duty, but you know, that's another way of ensuring that you don't just check in once in a while, but that there's kind of a continuing updating of where the overlaps are. It's been very useful for us to do that.
Thank you, Brendan. Anne or Candace, any other thoughts that you may want to add or ask of the group that we have remaining with us?
So I had a question pop into my head about 10 minutes ago that I think would probably take an entire workshop to answer. But, you know, listening to the three presentations, I was really excited because I think each of you have presented us with, you know, different tools and different ways to try and reach a broad spectrum of people who need to know this information, who need to hear it, and also people who need to use it for their everyday lives. And I guess what I was kind of curious about is how people respond to what it is you're offering them, but then how also you guys work collaboratively with the different groups to make your tools and, you know, policy papers and other things, you know, effective to them.
Well, I will say that, you know, in the example of Arctic Answers, it took a lot of time going back and forth with congressional offices to engage them, to get them to help us tune them for them. It took a hellacious amount of time to put together the Arctic Futures Conference. And so I think it's partly, it's just, you know, people need the resources and the time and the stubbornness to, you know, to have those. And I think it's so easy because we all have jobs that are defined like it's impossible to do everything you're supposed to do. And then you take on something like, you know, connecting with yet another audience that has different timelines, different bandwidths, et cetera. It's, yeah, so maybe part of it's just making people realize that, well, if you want this, it's not going to be easy and quick. It's going to take time and effort. Relationships are like that. And what we're really talking about is expanding everybody's sphere of relationships. It's going to be a lot of time.
Jill, do you have some thoughts on Candace's question?
Yeah, I was just thinking also, hopefully someone answering Candace's question, but then going back to maybe the self-forming team of collaborators talking to each other, that there is a lot of fatigue out there as well because there's multiple groups working on things. And if we're all going out and asking the same community members and the same stakeholders the same questions, it gets frustrating for them. They feel like they've already answered that question. Why is yet another group coming out there asking us the same thing? So I think in that way, it could be really good to communicate amongst ourselves to make sure that we're not asking the same questions over and over, or we can work together a bit to go as a, you know, to refine the questions that might answer all of our needs at the same time, rather than just constantly barraging people with questions.
Yeah, and that's a really great point that you just made there at the end, Jill. And you know, I think also like what you guys have done at AOOS and what Brendan has done with Search is that, you know, you guys spend a lot of time talking to people, collecting information, but then, you know, actually creating products that people can go back and see how you've used, you know, the information that you've collected from them. And I think, you know, that has also been a major criticism in the past is that, well, we've told you this, and, you know, what did you do with the information? How did it get applied? And so I think, you know, solutions and ideas like what you guys have had of how to take that information and create useful products, I think then shows that we're not just talking to talk, but really to have a legacy of information that people can go back and use and learn from.
Thanks, Candace.
So I thank you guys for that.
Great. So I'm happy to give folks back about 20 minutes of their day so they can relax before their next Zoom meeting. And unless you have anything else to share with the group, I'll just take a moment to give a plug for an upcoming IARPC webinar, which will occur on Friday, October 23rd, starting at 2 o'clock Eastern, a program manager chat with National Science Foundation. We've expanded our solicitation to support doctoral dissertation research improvement grants. And if you're not a PhD student currently seeking research funding from the foundation, please share this notice widely. There is a posting on the IARPC Collaboration website. I believe a reminder went out via email a day or two ago. Again, we are expanding our doctoral dissertation research improvement grants to support not just social sciences, but also system sciences and Arctic observing. So we're looking forward to that. Greg Anderson, Colleen Strawhacker from System Sciences, Erica Hill from Social Sciences, and I will be providing an overview of that funding opportunity and answering questions for folks interested in submitting proposals to that solicitation. So that's all I have. Anne?
Maybe we can include that in the notes and advertise.
Oh, why not? Yeah. Get it out there. Yep.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything to add.
All right. So let's thank Brendan and Jill again, and Helen.
Sorry, Roberto.
Oh, go ahead, Candace.
Sorry, I was just going to do also just a quick wrap up also.
Oh, yeah.
Just a couple more announcements. There is, so this month is actually Mosaic Month in IARPC. You know, now that all of those intrepid folks have done their year in the ice, well, hopefully none of them did a full year, although I know many did more than they expected because of COVID. And so IARPC will be kicking off on Thursday this week with the first webinar in that series, which is basically a Mosaic expedition overview. I believe that's from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern time. And you can find out how to sign up on the IARPC website. And then for our team, we are hoping to host a meeting late November, early December in conjunction with the Marine Ecosystems team on the few surveys that actually were successful in getting out this year, given the pandemic, and kind of getting a download from them and talking about what people saw and what we've learned so far. So we will post more information about that as it gets finalized, and we hope everyone will be able to join us. And thank you to Jill and to Brendan and to Helen for their incredible presentations today, and to Roberto for leading us through this meeting.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.